Welcome to Season 2 of Talk Lab to Me. Talk Lab to Me is an engaging discourse podcast hosted by COLA, a leading physician-directed accrediting organization that provides education and accreditation services to laboratories of all sizes. The podcast covers a wide range of topics, including the latest developments in laboratory science and medicine, as well as in-depth interviews with regulators and industry thought leaders about the importance of regulatory compliance. Welcome to Talk Lab to Me. We are happy to have you back. I'm so excited to welcome back COLA CEO, my co-host, Nancy Stratton. Welcome back to Talk Lab to Me.
Thank you, Danny. I love being here with you.
Today, we have a special guest with us today. Nancy, can you tell us about who will be joining us today?
Oh, it is my privilege and honor to introduce to you Dr. Michael Laposata. Dr. Laposata received his medical and doctoral degrees from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore and completed his pathology training at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. Following his residency, he served as co-director of the hemostasis laboratory at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. He later went to Boston to become director of clinical laboratories and the first chief of the Division of Laboratory Medicine at Massachusetts General Hospital, where he remained for 19 years before moving to Nashville to serve as pathologist in chief at Vanderbilt University Hospital. Dr. Laposata is the former chair of the Department of Pathology and is now a tenured professor in the department at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, Texas. Quite a wide range of geographical locations. Glad you ended up in Texas. I hear many wonderful things about you and your work at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. And again, just very, very honored to have you with us here today.
Thank you very much. I'm equally honored to be your guest.
So as we always begin, talk lab to me. Our first question, please take us behind the curtain. Please share with our Talk Lab to Me audience your role in the LDT ruling. On March 31st, 2025, the U.S. District Court for Eastern District of Texas vacated the FDA's final rule, ruling that agency had exceeded its statutory authority. What was the core legal argument that ACLA and the Association for Molecular Pathology successfully made? And why did the court find it so persuasive?
Well, I'm happy to tell you that really important story. Thank you, Danielle. So out of the blue, sitting in my office, I got a call from somebody who was a faculty member with me at Vanderbilt, Annette Kim. And Dr. Kim said, we have a request of you and it's a big one. So here's what the story is. I was told that the FDA wanted to take total control of laboratory developed tests. I said, what does that mean, Annette? She said, that means that if you wanted to start doing COVID tests in February of 2020 and you needed to do the laboratory developed test to get it started, you couldn't do it. You'd have to wait. You'd have to wait till the FDA said it was all okay and all the aspects of the testing were suitable to them. And I said, that's impossible. We can't do that. I'm a lab director and my specialty is coagulation, and I modify standard tests all the time to answer clinical questions to understand why people are bleeding or clotting and save their lives. I said, I'm going to have to send this all in to the FDA and wait weeks to months. And she said, that's the plan. So she said that the way it works is that the Association for Molecular Pathology cannot be the plaintiff. You have to have a person. And I'm asking you to be the plaintiff. And what I said to Annette is, I hadn't really had any desire to be that famous. And I certainly thought twice about suing the FDA. I mean, who was I suing? So she said, well, we really need a plaintiff. We'd like to actually have the case tried in Texas. We think it would be an environment where we'd have a good chance of a favorable ruling. Anyhow, I thought about it for maybe 3 minutes, and then I said, okay, Annette, I'll do it. So the next thing I know, I was connected to a pretty high-powered group of attorneys in Washington who interact with the FDA and its rulings. And I met a guy named Michael Shumsky, who was the lead attorney on this case. And boy, talk about a brilliant guy and articulate. So we made a plan of action. And really, my job was to educate Michael Shumsky about what was going to be different. I said, how many people do you think would have died if they didn't know they had COVID because it was February 2020 and we didn't have a test until, let's say, we got something in May. By that time, the number of people who were infected was enormous. And so I gave him plenty of examples, not just COVID, but every kind of lab developed test. We've had many genetic tests in coagulation where we identified a risk factor for blood clotting, changed a blood thinner to pick a better one. We think all the time about how to take care of the patient better, and our job is to get the diagnosis more accurately and faster. So to do that, somebody had to understand that we were not machines, because the FDA regulates instruments. And as Michael Shumsky got right away in our conversation is, I am not part of the machine. The FDA is necessary to look at the instrument that's measuring your cholesterol, all your blood clotting tests, and say, that instrument works. You've done the right validation studies. You can use that equipment to measure the amount of cholesterol. But what they can't regulate is me, because I'm right here on the spot saying, okay, yes, there's a kid and he had a tonsillectomy and he's got a pool of blood in his mouth and I have no idea what to do. Am I supposed to be regulated? I'm not the instrument. And what FDA did is they put all of that together and they decided they were going to regulate the whole thing. And then Mr. Shumsky came up with this great analogy of, I guess, if you were thinking about a surgeon uses tools. Maybe the tools have to somehow pass a standard, FDA or otherwise. But if somebody goes in to take out a mass in the abdomen and they see something that is causing a bowel obstruction, then they need to fix that. And they can't call up the FDA and say, by the way, I came in to take out this renal mass, but I'd like your permission to prevent this bowel obstruction. Can't do it. So that was the analogy. And so he articulated it extremely well. It was a court case that happened in March, April 2024. And the date for implementation by the FDA for these rules that they just put in place was early May. So everybody was gearing up, at least on the planning phase, of how do we do this? How much money will we need? How many people will we need to do this? So when it came time to present the material, Mr. Shumsky asked the judge, it was a judge trial, no jury, asked the judge if he could come up with a ruling as soon as possible, because if it got close to May, we were going to have to spend lots of money and lots of effort to get everything ready. And sure enough, the judge understood exactly. It wasn't hard. I'm not a machine, right? FDA should not regulate me. And yes, there are doctors involved in all of these cases to come out with good outcomes. And so they decided in March, he decided in March that that they would rule for the plaintiff and not the FDA. So lucky us. I think everybody collectively in our field breathed an enormous sigh of relief. And I think that the people on the other side, the FDA, I don't think they actually understood how the laboratory worked. I think when they heard what Mr. Shumsky said, take care of the instruments, not the doctors who are involved in making a diagnosis, they learned something. And I'm going to take a positive view of what the FDA thought after hearing it all, and that was they learned why their case had no merit and they didn't appeal. So 60 days later, it was all over and we won. And I have to say, I was worried the whole time because I didn't want to have an entire career of 40 plus years be noted for not being able to protect this this clinical practice that we have.
I love it when you say you're not a machine. We talked a little earlier. You said Dr. Laposata is not a machine. That is so important to remember. And while they said that it is professional medical services and not physical devices, what are the broader implications of framing laboratory testing as a service rather than a product? Could that logic extend to like challenge FDA authority over other regulated areas?
This really is a key question about laboratories. Uh, so let me take you back to about 1975. I saw my first clinical laboratory in my hometown, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, 1972. And I saw that there were no instruments. I mean, everything was a manual test. Then they brought an instrument in the next year. And I said, wow, it does 12 tests. It was shortly thereafter that they looked at how many tests were done. And they said, you know what? There's only, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 tests. And every doctor knows how to interpret every test. And every doctor knows how to pick among those 40 or 50 different tests. Well, where are we now? Well, let's see. We have 10,000 plus tests. A disease like cystic fibrosis, which was thought to occur because of one mutation. Now there's 2,000 different mutations that can cause it. It's become absurd. Pick between 10,000 tests, pick only the right ones. And they got expensive because the technology is more involved. So now we have tests that are expensive, a huge test menu, and very clinically and scientifically complex. So we know there's something in the laboratory that's a problem. And you know what? We've had all kinds of misinterpretations about what to do to help the laboratory get a diagnosis right away. So I think you probably remember the company Theranos. They said, well, we can get a drop of blood. You won't have to draw blood with a needle in the arm. And from that drop of blood, we can do 100 tests. Well, that's just adding more tests. Actually, it's adding tests that existed. So that wasn't the problem. And then if you look at other things that people are looking at as answers, trying to say that's the problem. We've got to shorten the time for tests. That's good, but what if you decrease the quality? The biggest problem is there's nobody to help your doctor who's caring for you and the people you love pick among those 10,000 tests and explain it to the doctor and say, this is exactly what it means. And you know what? In the context of this imaging study and this biopsy, here's the whole story. My primary care doctor, when I get something done that involves a biopsy or imaging, all those diagnostic pieces of the puzzle are thrown on her desk for just me, one of her patients. And she has to put them all together. Well, that's not right. We are the people who do the tests. And it's our responsibility, especially for those of us in the lab, that's where most of the tests are, to put that puzzle together and to say to the doctor, this is what you need, this is the interpretation, and this is what you could do clinically if you wish. Our work to create diagnostic information is the same work as a surgical pathologist who looks at a biopsy and says, that's breast cancer, and the same work as a radiologist who looks at images, and they've been trained for years to do this, and looks at your MR and says, that's an aneurysm coming off your aorta. We're the ones who have to say, by the way, this is why you had a stroke. These lab tests, this triglyceride level, all of the issues related to lab, and say, here's the explanation for your stroke. So somebody has to step into that spot. And we've had a problem in America because in America, when they decided in the 70s that every doctor could interpret their own test, They made it so you couldn't pay somebody like me, a clinical pathologist, to go down and interpret the test. And as my friends in Holland have teased me many times, they said, if you go down, figure out why somebody's bleeding in the emergency room, stop the bleeding, save the life, you get paid $25. If somebody has a meaningless biopsy reviewed for hernia sac, $200. And they said, until you figure out that in America, everybody will just look at the hernia sacs and all the other biopsies, and there will be no people to interpret the lab tests in America. So we have very few copies of me who go in every day and have rounds. Today at 1 o'clock, I'll look at 8 cases of people who are bleeding and clotting and tell them why that is happening and what their options are to deal with it. So we have to come up with an interpretive service that mimics what happens in anatomic pathology. The surgeon doesn't look at your biopsy, a pathologist does. And they're the ones who can tell you if you have cancer or not. And it's a radiologist who looks at your MRI, not the person who is looking at whether or not you have pneumonia. So yes, they can look, but they're not the experts. So this piece has to be created. And I've spent 30 years, the National Academy of Medicine has been very focused on diagnostic mistakes that kill hundreds of thousands of Americans that should not die. And when we fix that one, we have fixed the lab. So it's not coming up with greater regulation. The FDA said, if we just look over their shoulder more, they won't make so many mistakes. That's not the problem. And people like Elizabeth Holmes said, oh, we can do it from a drop of blood. Not the problem. The problem is having an expert who can help the primary care doctor, the surgeon, the pediatrician, everybody understand what the test results mean.
Your passion shines through in everything you say, and the fact that you have dedicated your life to this and you know the importance of your work and how it impacts every single patient that you come in contact with, their slides, their reports, consultations with their physicians, that just comes through so loud and clear. I hope every laboratorian listening to this feels pride that you are reflecting in your words. And I hope they walk away from this knowing that everything they do is so important.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought it out with equivalent passion, because we all want to take care of our patients better. That's why we did this. And so sometimes we have to take a leap. This is the leap.
Talk about a leap, the personal impact that court case must have had on you. I know from a laboratory accrediting organization's perspective, I know what we were doing to prepare laboratories, but we're talking organizations. You took it upon yourself to be that person. And I don't think any of us can imagine the toll that must have taken on you, the questions, the sleepless nights. And you described the story so well. Just thank you so much for that. Now, the lead up, stage 1, was scheduled to begin about a year ago. We're talking very recent times here. And as I've stated, COLA was working with laboratories, getting them prepared, just as other agencies were working with laboratories. There was a lot of work that was done because it was so close to the deadline. And thank goodness the conversations took place to get the ruling before that deadline took effect. But all the work that had taken place, what happens to those investments? Is any of that work wasted? Or does it actually leave laboratories better positioned under CLIA?
I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, there were things that we did that were defensive, preventive, and we no longer have to do that. So, is there something that's learned in those processes? Probably. Did we somehow think about all the things we do in terms of quality of testing? Probably, but I think those are soft gains, and it would have been better if we didn't have to do them. And I think that these kinds of discussions that we're having right now, these were prompted by all of that. And now we're talking about the real issues in the laboratory and how we can be diagnostic experts that can help all of Americans. And so this is a good example of how that issue led you to want to talk about it and then allow me to tell the story of what really is the missing piece in laboratory service.
And issues in the laboratory, there are quite a few. Workforce shortage.
Oh.
The pandemic really illustrated that, and COLA works with other wonderful organizations in our Workforce Action Alliance. COLA is also involved with Clinical Lab 2.0, the Project Santa Fe Foundation initiative, looking to the future of the laboratory. You talked about the 10,000 or so tests that are out there. The growth in technology has just been amazing in laboratory. But in areas like molecular pathology, pharmacogenomics, rare disease, all of these tests tend to rely heavily on LDTs. Has the regulatory uncertainty that we have just recently gone through, do you think that has negatively affected innovation and investment in those specialties?
I think that after this ruling was behind us, we started to think anew. I did, to say, what could we do? COLA is a great example of a partner that helps us do better in the laboratory and is a collaborative partner. What we need is more collaborative partners, organizations like the Association for Molecular Pathology, like COLA, all of them really, even pathology organizations like the CAP. But they have to be collaborative, not punitive. And you have to get the sense that you can practice medicine without going to jail. And so I don't want to worry about my career and my ability to help the next person who needs me because I made a decision to do a mixing study and a coagulation test, and it wasn't in the protocol book. But that's the sort of thing that I think we're looking to, and all of the groups, COLA again, a good example, have certain areas of expertise that they can bring to us. And I think if we could start enhancing those collaborations and recognize what all these organizations like COLA can do for us would be very, very important. You know, when you're in a big academic medical center, we certainly know what COLA can do. And I have friends who are doing the Santa Fe Project 2.0. And so I have a pretty good idea. What if you're in a 200-bed community hospital in a town that's 50,000 people? There really is no connection to these things. And yet that's where much of America is. It's not in 120 academic medical centers. What about the 6,000 hospitals in America? So they really, really need support. And somehow I think we have to figure out how these collaborative partners can play a bigger role in a 200-bed community hospital.
Thank you for your kind words about COLA, and I agree completely on collaboration, which is why you being on this podcast is so important. We accredit laboratories of all specialties and all sizes, and the more we can get the word out about collaboration and how we all need to work together for the future of the laboratory, the better off the health care for every American is going to be.
I think everybody has to understand that. If I can just give you the background that was reported by the National Academy of Medicine, maybe our most august body of physicians and scientists in the United States, in the early 2010s. In the 90s, there was a panel that produced a product. The book was called "To Err is Human," and in that book, they said that 100,000 Americans die every year in hospitals from errors, and they didn't say what kind of errors. They looked at procedural areas. Like you were going to get a cardiac catheterization. They put in the catheter, but poked the aortic arch, and it caused a lethal bleed. Or you got 4 times the amount of medication you should have gotten for breast cancer, which could produce a lethal event. So they counted those, and they said 100,000. but they didn't count the diagnostic mistakes. They did not count somebody like me going into my doctor, and if I were short of breath, is it asthma or does he have a blood clot in his lung? How many times does that happen? And when they counted those, that was enormously greater than procedural areas or drug areas. Then suddenly, here we are. Oh, whoa, the clinical lab is in the middle of all the errors that could potentially be prevented. So we published our report in 2015 on improving diagnosis. And this started putting the laboratory right at the front, because when you get sick, the first thing they have to do is figure out why you're sick. Because they don't start with the treatment and go back to why are they sick. Because if I had asthma, they give me a nebulizer. If I have a blood clot in my lung, they give me a blood thinner. You got to get that part right first. So it is now pretty clear that at least 60,000 Americans die every year when they come in for something that should not have caused their death. And another group from Hopkins said that number is actually much bigger. It's 300 plus thousand. And when you think about that, that's more than all the mass shootings combined, right? And people are saying, well, we can't fix the mass shootings, so I guess we can't fix this either. That's not true. If we just reoriented a little bit, if we organized ourselves as laboratorians in practice with the organizations that help us do better, then we're in a position to tackle this big problem of not making a diagnostic error that could potentially cost a life. So it touches us all, but most of us don't know when a diagnostic error was made on us. Because I know a good bit about this, I counted mine from the time I was a kid. I've had 10 diagnostic errors in my life. And a couple of them could have caused my death, but I just got lucky. And the fact is, we said in our report from the National Academy of Medicine, I sat on that panel for diagnostic error, there were 21 of us. And we said every adult American has been the victim of at least one diagnostic mistake. Every adult American. And it's probably more than one. So this is the problem that we need to fix. This is the problem where we all have to do what we do best to solve this. And I do think this is the big change in American healthcare. This vaults us in terms of quality of care to where Western Europe is. Because with hard data, how long do you live? What's the quality of your life? What's the infant mortality? We lose, and they're way better than us. And I think we can easily reach the quality of care that they have there. We have brilliant physicians. We have great technology. We have the best intentions of everybody. And there's no reason why we can't do that well.
Those stats are really eye-opening, and a part of problem solving is understanding where the problem lies and really understanding the background of the process to get there. So to be able to present this data really helps guide our path of where we need to go. Now, I want to ask you a couple of questions about direct-to-consumer testing. For those who were there with us at the Laboratory Enrichment Forum, we had a wonderful general session discussing direct-to-consumer testing. When we think of direct-to-consumer genetic tests and high-complexity oncology companion tests that sit at very different ends of the LDT risk spectrum, how should a future regulatory framework collaborate oversight to risk? And who should make this determination? How do you see laboratories evolving as demand for DTC testing increases?
This is a big issue, and I think it's an area where, with the right partnerships, we can make it effective. So I'm going to give you some examples. My brother-in-law is a PhD civil engineer. He's a really smart guy. And at some point, his doctor said, why don't we do pharmacogenomic testing for you? And he said, what's that? The doctor said, it's a series of genetic tests that will tell us if you respond to certain medications. And so he got the test results back, and it talked about missense mutations. It had codes NG551D. What does that mean? He said, Mike, I don't understand a single thing here. I mean, how am I supposed to know this? And it's direct to consumer. It's not direct to doctors. It's direct to consumer. Why would they write it in Greek? So I explained to him every one of these results. And so I'm struck by the fact that it's still a problem because even my primary care doctor, who's great, she doesn't know the terminology for genetic testing very well. So what happens is she's stuck when she gets a report and it says it's a missense mutation, not a nonsense mutation. Well, what does that mean? So how do I treat the patient? So here's what we did with pharmacogenomics. And this again focuses on the doctor not being an instrument and understanding clinical context. So I'll tell you about me. So I had episodes of back pain. I played baseball till I was 19. I was a catcher. And so that's a lot of squatting. Anyhow, here at age 50 something, my back started to hurt. So I started taking ibuprofen. And as a doctor who looks at all his lab tests and thinks about them, I noticed that over 3 6-month periods, my kidney function was declining. Now, there are a lot of reasons why my kidney function might have started to decline in my mid 50s, but um, I wondered if it was the ibuprofen. And at some point, instead of taking the 200 milligram tablets that you could buy in the drugstore, they said, well, you have to take those 4 times a day. We'll give you the higher dose, 875 milligrams. You can take it twice a day. So I get my pharmacogenomics and it says the drugs that could give me bigger adverse effects than helpful effects. They tell me which drugs won't work, and there is ibuprofen. And it says if you take a higher dose of ibuprofen, you will suffer renal injury, kidney injury, more than you will feel the effectiveness of pain relief. So that was communicated in a fashion by one company that was all genetic stuff. Even if you had told my physician, here's what it is, I don't think she would have got it. But it came to me and I knew exactly what it meant. And I said, holy cow, I can't take this category of drugs called NSAIDs. I need to use Tylenol. And really, it's such a simple thing, right? Like, how come you didn't start that way? And I would have started that way if I had the pharmacogenomics first. So think about this for a minute. The pharmacogenomics can impact the decision on about 250 drugs. There are about 26 genes that are associated with the metabolism of drugs. So I just had my first grandchild. And I said, you know what George needs? He's 3 weeks old. You know what George needs? He needs his pharmacogenomics. Because somewhere in life, he's going to need an antibiotic. He might need an antihypertensive when he's older. He might need an antidepressant. And when you have 6 choices and you can't use 2 of them, pick the ones that work right away. So you see, with direct-to-consumer testing, the first point we made in that diagnostic error committee is the patient has to take care of him or herself. And direct-to-consumer testing enables that. And when the doctor says, no, you don't need that test, I think it's important that the patient says, yes, I do. I have a friend who's just got married to a guy and his father died when he was 6. And we're having a conversation. I said, where'd he die? He died in the Detroit airport. From what? A heart attack. He had an early MI. How old was he? 40 something. I said, okay, you need a test. It's called lipoprotein little a. So he goes to his, that's for early MI risk. So he goes to his doctor. His doctor says, nah, I don't think so. So we got him to a cardiologist at an academic medical center, said, absolutely, you need it. Now, if he was in a position where he didn't have somebody, let's get you a cardiologist at an academic medical center, he wouldn't have had it. And now what? He's walking through the Detroit airport when he's 42 and nobody did anything? That's criminal because there are answers. So you see, we have the ability to empower patients. And I think we've underestimated how much patients know or want to know or can know. I can take an artificial intelligence generated report and say, prepare this report as though it were going to a primary care physician, and you get one version of it. Let's say for von Willebrand disease, a bleeding disorder. I could also then say, please rewrite the report for someone who's a high school graduate with no medical training. And then I kept going down. Yogi Berra only went up to the 6th grade. So I said, now we're going to send this to Yogi Berra. He finished the 6th grade. And doggone, it told the story of pharmacogenomics and lipoprotein little a in a way that Yogi could have understood it. And so this is where we have to get to. And I believe that medical care in America would be way better than all those people in Western Europe, because we would empower our great American population with the information that's the most important. I mean, having your health right, number one. Why is it that we don't have a to-do list? Here's what I need to know. And here's what I noticed. My urine turned a little pink. Yeah, that's a big sign. So we need to be able to make it easy for people to ask that question.
That is so right. And consumers are getting more and more intelligent these days. Before I get into the next question, I have to say congratulations on being a grandfather.
Thank you.
Grandkids are amazing. I love mine. Consumers want to know more and more what they can do for themselves in healthcare. And I don't know the statistics off the top of my head. I've heard them, but the number of people who go to ChatGPT or other AI programs so they can figure out their health, so they can have better discussions with their physicians. Direct to consumer tests fit in. But then also when we look at AI within the laboratory, there's a lot of AI assisted diagnostics. Next generation sequencing panel tests represent the next generation of LDTs. It's far more complex than anything CLIA or the original enforcement discretion framework anticipated. How do existing regulatory structures need to evolve to keep pace? And who bears responsibility for ensuring those tests are safe and effective?
I think that's the most trendy question right now. I gave a talk 3 days ago in Minneapolis to the Association for Pathology Informatics, and I told them about how we work with AI. Obviously, it's my responsibility to make sure that whatever AI said is clinically accurate. So we have, since January, taken, again, my area is coagulation. So everybody's being evaluated for a bleeding or clotting disorder has lab tests. And today I will go in, probably 7 to 10 cases will be there. What has happened up to the point that I walk in the room is that the resident, anybody could do this if they have some medical training, but the resident takes a clinical history, puts in some basic facts. This is a 56-year-old patient who had a stroke and had hypertension, and then puts in all the lab tests, gives it to AI and says, AI, come up with 4 parts: a summary of the clinical history, describe the labs that are relevant, and then give an interpretation and recommendations. So I have looked at what they give us, what comes out from AI. So AI gets a little better as we've done it since January, because we can tell our program, ignore this, don't do this anymore, don't bother to explain this part. So it's getting to be more and more what we need to see. But we calculated how many times it's wrong. We said how many wrong, how many perfect, and how many in between, kind of wrong and kind of okay. So it turns out it's wrong about 25% of the time. Now, if we took all the people who came into this hospital for appendectomies and 25% of them didn't have the appendix taken out and get sent home right away and be fine, and had 25% error, we'd be out of business in a week. I mean, you can't make that percent error. In fact, we want to try to keep it so that we're better than 99%. So here it is, 25% wrong. But you know what? I can, in 5 minutes, take a report that AI generated in 15 seconds that it would have taken me 30 minutes to write it. 15 seconds, I get it. And then I say, whoa, that sentence is wrong. You can't do that. Cross that out, say something different. So now with me and AI, I can do 100 cases a day. Before, I could do maybe 20 in 2 hours. So now I could potentially do coagulation evaluations for half the country. So AI has really sped this up, and in the hands of somebody who's an expert. I've signed out more than 50,000 cases in my life. So I've seen one of those and one of those. So, so when you put those two together, AI works. Now, Elon Musk said, who of course has some investment in AI. I don't know what he owns, but he said, I just put my lab tests into AI and it tells me what it all means. And I thought, so here's a guy who's almost a trillionaire, and that poor guy is getting 25% wrong answers, and he believes them. So holy cow, Elon, wake up, buddy. You still need the collaboration that comes with something like what we're doing with AI and an expert doctor to tell you what it really is.
Thank you for that. We have one more question. So, is there anything about the discussion surrounding laboratory developed tests that you wish the public, as well as laboratory science professionals, understood better? And what would be your hopes for the laboratory industry moving forward with all that we've seen with this court case?
So thanks for the opportunity to spread my wings just a little bit. When I moved to the Mass General Hospital in Harvard in 1989, I got an apartment not far from the hospital. And there were two guys, young guys who worked in the financial sector that I met when I was moving in. And they said to me, what do you do? I said, I'm going to be the first lab director at the Mass General Hospital. And they said, what's that mean? I'm in charge of all the blood testing. And they both said at the same time, almost synchronously, is that a real job? We thought it was just one big machine where the tubes rolled in, they went on an instrument, a number was punched out, and that number went to their doctor. And they said, do you just like make sure the machine is on? What do you do? And it was that level of not knowing that really opened my eyes. I mean, these were smart people. They had advanced degrees from Wharton. And I thought, wow, you guys have no idea that the lab tests are telling the doctor what to do and you have to pick between all these. Nah, then no idea. I think that organizations, COLA and all the others, have to tell people that doctors are an important component because these instruments, the clinical lab scientists, doctors are an important component to work together with everybody to get the right diagnosis, and that we need more clinical doctors to get that diagnosis right away, and make it accurately. I tell this story often in a talk that two women are walking after dinner who are friends. And the one woman says to the other, I saw my doctor today. And guess what? He told me I had a diagnosis of something called porphyria. And the other woman is shocked. She said, I have a diagnosis of porphyria, but it took me 5 years to get the diagnosis. How long did it take to get yours? And the other woman says 3 days. And the woman says, come on, 3 days? She says, well, I actually use a hospital where they have diagnostic experts that work with AI, and they can get an answer in 3 days. And I think that's when the other woman says, I'm going to that hospital. And everybody wants the care that's going to help them. And there's absolutely no reason why we couldn't do that. Yes, a few days, we'll tell you what tests to do. You get the test done wherever you want. What we're talking about here, about getting the right answers, that doesn't say anything about where you get the test done. So don't fear if you work for Quest or LabCorp or any of the commercial laboratories. Do the test. Do what you do. The key thing is open the door to getting clinical information about what it really means. So I think that what we really have to do is figure out, somebody has to start organizing all of our effort. And I think that we've worked very hard at doing our job for whatever our organization is focused upon. But somehow I think there has to be some kind of summit where we all come together and say, you do this, you do this, you do this. And we have the problem of getting the accurate diagnosis quickly solved. So that I think is there's one take home message. If you're driving, right? Remember this is the take home message, is that really we're trying to help everybody get the best possible outcome. And that involves a team, and that team involves a doctor. And now that FDA has decided I am not a machine, that they will look at it differently enough. And now the door is open for us to participate.
What a great way to summarize everything. And looking back at your career, we cannot end this podcast without discussing the impact that you've had on the DCLS program at UTMB and throughout the country. We acknowledge DCLS for high complexity laboratory directors. Within the Clinical Lab 2.0 initiative, we're working more with the DCLS graduates and finding the various ways they work in healthcare. Your individual contributions to the laboratory and the future of healthcare cannot be understated. Just the fact that you're willing to continue to speak with different organizations, suggest this summit, which is something we're going to have future discussions on to see how can we pull something like that off these days. But just sincerely, a huge thank you to you for spending the time with us, for your career, and I hope we're able to collaborate more in the future.
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thank you to my co-host, Nancy, for joining me on Talk Lab to Me, and Dr. Laposata, thank you for this wonderful episode. Your contributions are countless, and congratulations being a new grandfather.
Thank you.
For all those listening, I hope there was a lot of information that you're able to take away. And as Nancy mentioned earlier, the work we do as a team in healthcare is so important to that patient, whether the patient is us or someone we love. It is important to take the time and work together. Thank you all for joining me and Talk Lab to Me. Until next time, stay compliant, stay curious, and keep talking lab to me.